Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Katie is a first-time mom who welcomed her daughter Quinn to the world in June of 2022. Her journey into motherhood took a turn when she was diagnosed with preeclampsia during labor. She ultimately ended up in the OR for an unplanned cesarean, and these events left an incredible mark on her birth and postpartum story. Her experience highlights the blind spots within the education she received in parenting classes, and she hopes that by sharing her journey, she'll be able to shed light on the emotional and physical impact of birth trauma, the importance of trauma-informed medical care, and the need for postpartum support throughout the fourth trimester. Oh my gosh, this was my second time trying to do it, you guys, and I just get today. So that's what you're gonna get. I feel like we've got all the information in there, and we just keep it raw and real in here. So there it is. Thank you, Katie, for joining me today. I'm excited to have you.
Me too.
I think you're one of the first people I've had on that I don't personally know. I know that you had somebody that you were listening to who came on, and Sam, and you listened to her story on here, and you messaged me, and I'm so glad you did, because I think it's probably nerve-wracking to send a message to someone and be like, hi, if you're looking for more people, I'll do it, because it's a nerve-wracking experience. But I'm excited because even just from the little snippets that you gave me when you signed up for this time slot, I think that your story is so huge and definitely traumatic, but I think that parts of it people can probably relate to, and I think it's so good to get all different types of stories here so people can find something that maybe mimics or resembles what they experienced.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a heavy topic, and there is a lot of trauma, but ultimately I am happy, and I have a happy, healthy baby a year later. And so there is a light at the end of the tunnel for people who are recently postpartum, or even just still struggling with their own traumatic birth experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, I just realized, I'm like, yep, it's the beginning of July. It's been exactly a year, and just had a little birthday. Oh my gosh. All right. So before we kind of jump into all of it, I typically like to start by, if you want to tell us a little bit about what your life was like pre-baby, and when you guys decided, it was time to add a little one to the life.
Yeah. So I've worked in education for about 12 years now. I started working as a high school English teacher fresh out of college. And so I was pretty stable within my career early on, but I knew I always wanted to have a family, to have children. I came from kind of a tumultuous home life growing up. My mother was unable to care for my brother and me. And so for me, it was really important for me to be able to do it right, to do it differently. And so I met my husband right before I turned 29. We got married. Let's see, that was 3 years later. And let's see, before it was our 3-month anniversary, I found out I was pregnant. So we got pregnant very quickly, which was very surprising, but very welcomed. And I know I'm very lucky that that was our experience, but it was definitely surprising. And kind of, we were just like, okay, what do we do now?
Right.
I took the pregnancy test, and I was like, okay, do I call my doctor right now? I just felt like I had no idea what was going on, or what the next steps were. My pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I had your normal physical pains. I went and saw a chiropractor and a PT, pelvic floor specialist. But nothing crazy, lab work, blood pressure, all of those things were great throughout the entire pregnancy. So obviously being diagnosed with preeclampsia, day 2 of my induction, I was like, what is preeclampsia? I don't understand. Like, what is blood pressure? I don't know. Like, what's
Right.
going on?
And that's crazy that it took them until like labor to like, notice something like that. I mean, I guess it can come on pretty quickly, but for all of a sudden, if you didn't have it the whole time, for them to give you a full-blown diagnosis of it is like, kind of crazy, I'm sure. And it was
Yeah,
probably shocking.
right. Yeah, no, and the midwife said, like, you have preeclampsia. And I was really like, okay, what is that?
What is that?
Yeah. And I feel like I did my due diligence in trying my best to educate myself during the pregnancy on birth and all the things that would come up. And me and my husband took birthing and parenting classes. And I feel like in a lot of that education, the unexpected or the maybe not so positive aspects of birth are either really left out, or they're completely traumatizing to the fact that you're like, I'm going to skip this chapter.
Right.
Or they're very much like, I think we took one parenting class and it was like, here's a slide on a cesarean. Anyways, moving on.
Right.
So I think I just felt really caught off guard, and just like had this lack of knowledge. But it's too late, right? You're in it already. You can't like go and read the book now.
Right. And at that point you're in labor and you're going through it. Now, prior to being in, in the hospital and all of this birth, you took some classes, was there things that you like really wanted to have happen? Did you like have a birth plan? Like, was your mindset on doing something a specific way? And like, how did that change when they were like, hey, just kidding, you have preeclampsia?
Right. Yes, I definitely had a birth plan printed out with my little checklist and everything. I really wanted to try to go unmedicated. I recognized that like I wasn't going to try to like be a hero. Like if I needed an epidural, I would get an epidural, but like I really just wanted to see what my body could do on its own. Like I had read Ina May Gaskin's book, like really thought that positive thinking, hypnobirthing, breathing techniques, all of that stuff, like having really a positive mindset, I really felt like could equate to a positive birth experience.
Right. Yeah. And then what, you go into this and you ended up with an induction.
Right.
How did they decide to get to that point?
So I was 41 weeks.
Okay.
And I don't even think I was dilated at all at that point. And so, and again, this is another point where I feel a little bit uneducated, because I felt like I was told I was getting an induction. And to me, I'm 41 weeks pregnant. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I'm ready to not be pregnant. I'm ready to meet my baby. I now know that there's a lot of potential risks of an induction. But again, this is something I'm learning like after the fact, or learning because I experienced all of those risks. So I was induced, or my induction started at 41 and 2 days. And then my daughter was born on the 3rd day of my induction. So 41 weeks and 5 days.
Yeah. So you go into the hospital, you think you're having an induction, but you're still going to be able to do this whole thing. And how far into this did they come in and say, just kidding, you have preeclampsia? And did they at that point say, we need to do a C-section right now? Or was that kind of a progression?
That was a progression. So I was in, I believe that on the 2nd day of the induction is when my blood pressure was high and they told me I had preeclampsia. It wasn't like it didn't seem like an emergency.
Right.
They started me on, well, I'm not sure what the name of it is. Maybe
some medication.
Some medication. Again, this is where like lack of education comes in, I feel like. But anyways, they started me on this medication. Things were looking good. I was connected to the monitor, and I was having contractions that were being recognized on the monitor, but I wasn't feeling anything. So
Oh,
they'd be like, you're having a contraction right now. And I was like, really? Like, I don't feel anything. I was like, maybe I'm going to be like this freak of nature who doesn't
right.
experience any pain. Yeah, right. Um, and so like the induction process continued with Pitocin and things just weren't really changing. And so they broke my water. And after they broke my water, that is when I realized I was not Wonder Woman and I felt an incredible pain. Um, there was no like no breathing, anything. I was like, you need to get the anesthesiologist here stat.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
God bless my husband, like trying to give me positive affirmations. And I was like cursing and I was just like, I'm nope, nope,
Nope,
I'm
it's not
ready for
happening.
I'm ready. And so once I had the epidural, I was very comfortable. And things did progress after they broke my water. I did start dilating, actually dilating pretty quickly. I think they broke my water probably between 4 and 5 p.m. And I was at, I think like 9 centimeters by the time I was like 8 o'clock. My husband
Oh,
had gone
wow.
to get dinner and I sent him a text being like, you need to run back here. Like I'm at 9 centimeters.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Except then it stopped. I was just there at 9 centimeters. And while I was dilating, she was not descending the way she needed to descend. So she was basically just stuck in my pelvis. Um, and so around midnight, my midwife came in and checked me. And shortly after that, a doctor who I'd never met before, hadn't seen him before, came in and said that he needed to check me. And I said, well, no, thank you. My midwife just checked me 15 minutes ago.
Right.
And he said something along the lines of, well, if I don't check you, she's not going to be delivering the baby. I will. And it was just so abrupt and cold. And again, like, I don't even know what this doctor's name is, you know?
Right.
Um, it just caught me so off guard. Um, and then things progressed very quickly. Like in my mind, it seems like it's all a blur after that. And a nurse comes in and essentially starts prepping me for a C-section. And it's like, I felt like I was the last to know. You know, C-section wasn't something that was brought up at any point in my pregnancy. It wasn't something talked about at my induction. It wasn't something that was talked about on days 1 or 2 of the induction. And even I look over my medical notes and it's like anticipated vaginal birth, anticipated vaginal
Right.
birth. So like it was, and I was like, I'm 9 centimeters. Like, what do you mean? But, you know, because she was not moving down as quickly or in the right position, she was OP, so she was like sunny side up.
Yeah.
They decided that I needed a C-section. And so I think that really kind of like is the start of the trauma. It's not even like going into the OR, it's this doctor just being so abrupt and
Right.
cold. Um, and really like just letting me like figure it out on my own. Like, oh, I guess I'm having a C-section because the nurse is coming in and like
Right.
prepping me to
It's
get
not even
wheeled
a
into the other room.
conversation.
Right.
It was this is what we're doing. And it wasn't even, like you said, like being the last to know is just
Yeah.
so mind-boggling, right? Right. Like, I mean, you're supposed to be having this magical vaginal delivery and soaking all this in, and here we are. And, you know, for all you know, I mean, this could have been his first birthday, it could have been his 16th, but it shouldn't matter,
Right.
right? You know?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And you brought up this idea of this magical moment. And like, I knew this was going to be a painful thing, but I, again, I really thought like having a positive mindset, believing that I could do this. Um, I really thought I would have like that magical moment where my daughter is placed on my chest. Um, and that like would be the moment I became a mother, right? I didn't get that, right? I got my baby held up to me behind a drape. So I struggled for a really long time with like, wait, what was the moment where I became a mother? You
Right.
know, I didn't get to hold my baby right away. even my early memories of being in the OR, like I remember, at that point, I'm so tired. I'm so drugged up. I remember just staring at the ceiling tiles, being like, hold it together. Like, you have to remember this. Like, don't fade out. Like, keep it together. And really, it's like trying to like tell a drunk person to be sober. Like, that's really what I felt like I was fighting against. I was really lucky that my midwife took a lot of pictures, and I feel like that has helped fill in the gaps with maybe where I'm not remembering certain things. But I think what I found really difficult in speaking with other C-section mothers, you feel like a bystander in your own birth. Even saying I gave birth, like I still kind of feel like I can't really say that. Like, what did I do really? I just laid there. And so I think that there's a lot of shame and like a lot of failure that people who experience C-sections, I think feel.
And I think it probably is like so exacerbated when it's unplanned. Like mamas who, have a planned C-section are able to mentally prepare for that and be like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is how it may go. Like I might not have that perfect, come up and lay me on my chest moment, but I'm going to have this instead. And they can prepare for that. But
totally. And
you didn't have that. It makes it probably even harder to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think C-sections I don't want to speak for all women, obviously, or all, people who experience C-sections, but I think they can be very empowering to many people. And I think that whether they're planned or they just have the right medical team who can, help them feel like they have some sort of say in their own birth, I do think that there can be empowered C-sections for sure.
Yeah.
Mine did not feel that way at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So you give birth to this baby, they bring her to your face and you're in and out of it trying to stay with it. And then they're closing you up, I'm assuming, and you're going back to the room. How was she? Did she get to come back to the room with you? What was this immediate postpartum life like?
Yeah, so there's a picture of me holding her for the first time. And I don't remember that. So they did hand her to me in the OR. And then my first memory of actually having her on my chest is a few hours later in the recovery room. So I'm kind of waking up or whatever. My husband's there next to me. And like, that's when we start making our phone calls to let our family and friends know that she had come. But yeah, I mean, I think anyone's exhausted at that point, right? But it did feel like just all these little gaps here and there that, again, in the early postpartum stages were really difficult to accept.
Yeah. It's gotta be, like you said, at least you have, not at least, but you have those photos to fill in the gaps, which is great, but also probably was so emotional and probably frustrating in a way to kind of look at and be like, I don't remember that.
Definitely. Yeah. Even the picture of me holding her, I only found it recently because I was talking to my husband. I talked to my husband a lot about all of these emotions, and he's been really my rock throughout this. But I only stumbled across that first photo of me holding her recently, and I was like, oh, I guess I did hold her in the OR, but again, like I didn't remember that moment.
Yeah. So you're in recovery room, and what happens next? What's it like?
So after I'm in the recovery room, we get brought to the postpartum room, and it's very, very early in the morning. I mean, my daughter was born at 2 a.m. It's probably like 6 or 7 now that we're going into the postpartum room. And it's just a lot of information. Like, right, the nurse probably has to legally say all of these things, but we're just like, yeah, okay. And then we just slept. The next day, there were several doctors and midwives looking at my incision. My incision was very, very bruised. It did have some drainage. They were going to keep an eye on it. It didn't seem like anything super concerning to them. Definitely like not something that maybe they see every single C-section, but they were going to keep an eye on whatever was going on down there. I was really horrified to even look at what was going on down there. They encouraged me to go take a shower. It was like I was just afraid to even just see what it looked like. So they ended up putting an AB cover on it, and yeah, I was able to kind of like start to move around and feel a little bit better. But it was incredibly painful. It is a major surgery. And, I think people think like, oh, it's just a C-section. Or right. I remember when I was pregnant, one of my students, actually, I teach high school, saying, why don't you just get a C-section? Like, why would you want to go through all that pain? And now I'm like, right. Oh, that pain, all that pain, like the C-section is so painful. You're recovering from this major surgery. You don't realize how much you use your abdominal muscles until you don't have them. Yeah, like so sitting, standing, moving, sneezing. You like sneezing is actually pretty horrifying to do after a C-section. But yeah, I mean, I guess it was just really much more painful than I had anticipated.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine. And I know that, like you said, people so easily and so quickly are like, oh, it's a C-section. And a lot of people have, I feel like a lot of men, people who are not giving birth are often like, oh yeah, just have a C-section. It's like, it's easier. It's the easy way out. Right. Like, right. But in fact, that's totally almost not that it's the opposite. They're both very difficult, but with the C-section, you're now expected to bounce back and take care of not only yourself, but this newborn. And how can you even do that? I mean, right. If these surgeries, there's so many other surgeries that like are of equal par, I guess you could say, that people are, in bed for weeks and weeks, and this is just expected to be okay. Now go take care of your baby, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Now, postpartum, did you have any things that you were looking for postpartum that you were hoping for, that you had lined up, or was your husband planning to be around? What were you hoping for postpartum to look like? What were you kind of planning for it to look like? And then how long did you end up being in the hospital, and what did it end up actually looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be in the hospital as the shortest amount of time. So again, I was expecting a vaginal birth, so I thought that would be like maybe one day postpartum, go home. I hadn't really planned much of anything. I did have my little basket in the bathroom with the materials I would need for a vaginal birth. But other than that, I really didn't have much. I didn't prep any meals. Like I assumed I would be able to cook, or, even if it was something really simple, I just didn't anticipate how immobile I was going to be.
Right. Now, what did the hospital stay end up looking like? How long were you there for? What was it like when you got home?
So we went in Thursday. That was the first day of my induction. And we came home Tuesday night. The night before we were discharged, I was rocking Quinn, and I just felt this incredible pain in my incision. Like it made those contractions that I had pre-epidural seem like nothing. Like I felt like I was being lit on fire. And I just started screaming out in pain, and the nurses came in, and like for some reason I told them I had been trying to get up to go to the bathroom. I didn't say I was rocking my baby, because it was like so embarrassing to me. Like I can't rock my baby with this incision. Like again, it goes back to like, am I even a mother, right? I wasn't changing her diapers because I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't get to be there for her first bath, and now I can't even rock her. Like I'm so ashamed to even tell these nurses that is perhaps what triggered that pain. Um, so the next day I was discharged. They did want me to stay because my blood pressure was still pretty high. But for me, I was like, my blood pressure is high because I'm here. Please let me go home.
Right.
So I did go home, and it, like, again, it was incredibly painful. I couldn't go up the stairs. The first night I really demanded that I sleep in my own bed, and I could not get into the bed. I had to use a step ladder. And then even when I got into the bed, like, again, this is where you don't realize how important your ab muscles actually are, is like the bed was too soft, even though it was like a Tempur-Pedic, like a pretty firm mattress. Like it was just too soft for me to like even try to support myself. Um, and so yeah, that whole, again, like idealistic vision I had of like me and my husband sleeping next to the bassinet and the dog at our foot of the bed, and it was just going to be like so beautiful. We were one happy family. Yeah, like that didn't happen, not initially, at least. I had to sleep on the couch, the bassinet. We put our little basket on the coffee table, and that's where she slept for like the first week or two of her life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just so crazy how it can go from, what you're anticipating to being so different, right? I mean, everyone makes these birth plans and, we have it all planned out, and things obviously we know can go sideways, right? Like no birth is perfect in, every aspect. But then it's the postpartum side of it too. And like that's where this whole like podcast comes into play of, people don't think about, okay, what am I going to do postpartum, right? And like what happens if my birth doesn't go how I thought it was going to go.
Right.
And kind of like prepping for that. Now I'm interested. I know that you were saying that, you had this crazy amount of pain. Did they end up finding that it was a specific reason? I know in the notes from the little like informational thing, you told me how when they did your C-section, they found out that you had 2 placentas too.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I'm like, oh my gosh. So like, did they think that part of that was, did they figure out why this pain was happening? What did they say?
Well, yeah, they would eventually find out about the pain.
Okay.
But to go back to, yeah, there was a lot of surprises with my birth, right? Like the preeclampsia, having the C-section, and then yeah, I had 2 placentas. I don't know what that means. If you Google it, like you'll find answers you don't really want. So I would like to just think that I had 2 placentas and it was just some freak thing.
Right.
But I didn't get to see them. So I mean, but yeah, I remember like hearing the doctor say 2 placentas, and I'm like, what? Like I had to have heard that wrong. And then so the doctor actually said, the surgeon said to my husband, like she had 2 placentas. So even if she had had a vaginal birth, she would have like hemorrhage, she would have like bled out, which, I mean, on one hand, you're like, okay, well, at least I guess I had this C-section. Right. But on the other hand, it's like, it doesn't really help you in terms of feeling, I don't know, any more empowered or any more safe in the choice you made.
Like if you were to take like a step away and be like a third party perspective, you probably would have been like, oh my God, that's great that you had it then, right? Because everything's good. But like, as the person who's going through it, I'm sure you're like, well, yeah, sure. But at the same time, like, why the heck didn't they know I had 2 placentas?
Yes. I
like, was Quinn like doing some magic tricks? Like she was hiding it. Like,
yeah, I know. I had all the ultrasounds, and I know they did see a placenta, right? Obviously, like I know I had placenta kind of like towards the back of my cervix, but I also had this one in the front, which they either didn't see or I mean, I don't know. But it's funny, like now thinking back to my pregnancy, I always only felt her kicking on my right side. Like that's where I'd always feel her feet. And I was like, she must, be in a weird position or something like that. But I feel like thinking back now, it's likely that the placenta was over the other half of her. And that's why I really only felt her on one side. At one side. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. I mean, such wild things that happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're home, and now when the incision pain happened in the hospital, what did they tell you about that when you were in the hospital?
So they said I had a hematoma, which is basically like a bruise under, like
Right.
A bruise with, like, I don't know what,
Like
I'm
an
not a
internal
scientist.
bruising. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
Thank you
yeah.
for helping me out with that. An
You're okay.
internal bruise. And they basically said, like, it's normal. Your body should reabsorb it. And they sent me home with, some really strong ibuprofen and a few oxycodone that they gave me only after I had started having that like searing pain the night before I was discharged.
Okay. So you get home and what is this pain? Does it come back? What is it like?
Yeah. Yeah. Once that night in the hospital where it like felt like I was on fire, it really like it. I guess it wasn't to that point, but if that was a 10, I was like at a 7 or 8. Um, like I couldn't walk out of the hospital. I had to sit in a wheelchair, but even in a wheelchair, it's again your abdominal muscle. So I'm really like holding myself up with like the armrests to kind of just like make it just I don't know to give myself some support, or in the car, holding onto that handle up here
Yeah.
just to feel like any support. Our driveway was on a bit of an incline and I couldn't climb up it. I couldn't even get out of the car. Like my husband had to basically like drive on the grass to drop me off at the front door. So everything about my daily life, aside from having a newborn, was completely changed.
Yeah.
Um, and so from there, I got the staple. So I was stapled rather than stitched back up after my surgery. So about a week later, I went into my physician office to get those staples removed, which I was happy to do because again, it made me feel like I was Frankenstein or something. But the next day, my incision started bleeding. And it really didn't stop. I woke up in the morning with kind of just like some stains on like my pajamas, but then it was like I'm having to keep changing my clothes because I'm just bleeding so much. I had my cousin come over. She works in the medical field. She like used some steri strips and gauze to try to kind of cover it up. But it was like then a few hours later, it was just like, we have to change this again. And so I reached out to one of my friends who actually is a doula. She's like, yeah, that's not normal. Like, let's go to the ER and see what's going on. And so this is again where that like failure as a mother feeling comes in, because my daughter is a week old and now I have to remove myself from her. Right. It's either that or bring a newborn to the ER, which probably seems like the worst choice of the two.
Yeah.
Thinking about like her health. So we go to the ER, and the hospital I was at, they actually have an ER within the OB floor. And so I was able to be seen by a midwife there who really kind of just said, like, yeah, there's some drainage. She like kind of squeezed a little bit of it out. And then I was just sent home. And the bleeding continued. And again, I was like constantly changing the gauze on it and like kind of hyper fixated on this thing as opposed to like bonding with my baby. I really just felt like all consumed by this issue. And so a few days later, it really wasn't stopping, and I could see this like a little bit graphic. I could kind of see the incision opening. And so I was like, I'm going back to the ER. And I was seen by a doctor that time, and the doctor looked at it and she said, when did you put this gauze on? And I was like, put it on like 45 minutes ago. She's like, yeah, this is not normal. So she had to reopen the incision, kind of poke around, and that hematoma, as far as I'm understanding it, essentially became like a blood clot that was putting this pressure on my incision and opening it up that way. So she removed the blood clot, and her opening up the incision, it was pretty superficial. She didn't have to obviously go very far in. And so rather than stitch me up, she packed it with, I believe it's called isoform. And she had to set up a visiting nurse to come and change the dressing every day. And so I was a new mom trying to take care of a newborn, but having, again, like my day interrupted. for like 45 minutes, an hour every day for this visiting nurse to come in and change my dressing on my incision. And so like, yeah, you're just feeling so helpless. You're feeling like your body failed you, right? Not just like in terms of not being able to deliver vaginally, but also like now it can't even heal properly.
Right.
It obviously limited me being able to do anything around the house. It limited me being able to like play with my daughter on the floor, to pick her
Right.
up. And it actually really ended up impacting my milk supply. I think my body and my emotions were kind of
Right.
pulled in a lot of different directions. And so I had planned on breastfeeding, and like it really just did not go well. And again, it's like one of those things I felt like a failure. All these things I thought my body really was supposed to do, it just wasn't doing.
And that's just on top of all the hormones that you have racing and raging. I'm sure that that's
Exactly.
just so like mentally debilitating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It for a long time it was really hard for me to like think about the day my daughter was born without crying. And it they weren't tears for the right reason. You know,
Right.
I think you hear moms a lot say that, it was the best day of their life when their kid was born. And like, I mean, I got the best thing on that day, but that day was certainly not the best day of all the
Best
days
day.
I've had. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of guilt over that too, right? It's all this
Right.
guilt and shame and sense of failure you feel.
Yeah. It's just so it's funny how you say that, because today I just happens to be one of those days that everyone wants to record their podcast episodes, and the episode that I'm recording or who I'm recording with next is, I don't know if it'll go up before or after, so people may or may not hear it. If not, it'll be up soon, but is talking about parenting guilt and mom guilt and
Yeah.
society and how that makes you feel, and it's such a real thing for sure. Now, how did you work through this? Like, this is so much to like take on and
Yeah.
to experience. What kind of resources did you utilize? Like, how have you gotten to being able to sit here right now and like wanting to tell your story and not crying, which I give you props for, because it makes me even feel emotional. But yeah, what have you done, and what has helped, what hasn't helped? I think
Yeah.
other people would love to hear.
Well, when I was dealing with the healing of my incision, I was also following up with my OB practice, and I met a doctor there who I'd never met before, unfortunately, because she's absolutely wonderful. And while she was there really to check on my incision and see how it was healing, she was really one of the kindest people, somebody I really needed during that time. She had had 2 C-sections, and as an OB, she had felt obviously a little bit of like a failure from that. And
Yeah.
I didn't really know anyone that had a C-section when I had mine. Some people maybe had them years ago, like had an aunt who had one 20 years ago, right?
Right.
There was that sense of removal. And so talking to my OB, because I said to her, I was like, is it normal to feel like I feel like a failure? And she's like, that is very common. And she talked about her own experience with C-section. And so that was very, very helpful when I really probably needed it the most. Also, like my husband, I like give him credit's not the right word, but he also experienced something kind of traumatic. He's a lot, I think he was a lot stronger throughout it. But he came home with a baby and a wife to take care of.
Right.
My husband is very kind of like type A. So when I came home, he had all my medications in a spreadsheet and knew exactly when to give me what. And he's been great just to talk to. Like randomly some nights we'll just be sitting on the couch and I'll say, I'm feeling really sad about my C-section right now. And I don't know what triggered it or like
Right.
where this is coming from. but he'll always be like, all right, well, let's talk about it. What's going on?
Yeah.
I unfortunately like had another friend after I had a C-section also have a C-section. So there was like that bond between us as well. And I've been in therapy for many years, but my therapist also does EMDR. And so that was something she suggested to do to work through some of that trauma.
Yeah.
That was something that was incredibly helpful um, throughout the experience. I also did some like more holistic things like Reiki, and I did some birth processing with specialists as well. So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of different types of things that I've tried. I've read stories of other women. So I think it's a lot, there's a lot of different ways to kind of feel like you're healing yourself. And so I kind of
Yeah.
had to come at it from a lot of different angles and like for a long time. And like, yes, it's a year later. But like there are still moments where I question what happened or why it happened or like why I felt so uneducated throughout it all. And it also like I think the thing about birth trauma is it's not just over once the
Right.
birth trauma is over. You know, if I had just had a C-section and that was the end of it, and my healing had been fairly normal, like what would my postpartum have looked like? Um, and I think it also makes me personally feel very like I very much want to have more children,
I was gonna
but
say that was gonna
it's
be my next question
yeah,
was, did you guys think that you wanted to have more than one prior to? And like, how has this changed your perception? Because I feel like some people are
yeah,
then like, I want more because I want to make up for that experience. Whereas other
yeah,
people are like, that was so traumatic.
right.
I'm done,
I think it's a little bit of both,
Yeah.
right? And on one hand, I don't want to have a baby to have a redemption story, right?
Right,
Like
right.
I want to have a baby because I want to have another baby and I want that birth to be different. But well, how is that pregnancy going to feel for 40 weeks having this anxiety and anticipation about what is to
What's
come?
gonna happen?
So I that is something that's kind of like that weighs on me a bit. Um, I always wanted more than one. There's moments where I think maybe I'm just happy with one.
Yeah.
But then there's a sense of guilt there too, like, but doesn't my child deserve to have a sibling? Um, yeah, it's really hard. I have thought before I had Quinn that like I would try to get pregnant shortly after she turned 1. Um, Within my own healing process, that's not something I'm ready for. Like I can't wrap my mind right now around even the thought of being pregnant because again, I feel like that's going to come with a lot of anxiety.
Right.
And it's scary to think like, okay, well, if I have another C-section and if my body responds the same way, well, now I have a newborn and I have a toddler.
Right.
And it's not just that's going to be really hard on me. It's how is that going to affect my toddler when mommy comes home, not just with another baby, but now mommy can't pick you up, mommy can't play with you.
Right.
So it's a lot to try to like process for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that, yeah, I mean, thinking about having subsequent and I can't talk today, but additional, we're going to go with that word so I don't say it wrong. Additional children after having one that's had a traumatic or difficult birth, it's hard because, yeah, you're right. You don't just have you to think about. You now have to think, okay, well, my husband could take care of both of us, but what if there's another child? And like, I think that, I've worked with many clients as a postpartum doula that have had, struggle in their first birth and that now realize like, if I do this again, I need support, whether it's to this extent that you've had where, you're not able to physically help much, or if it's just realizing that you need more people in the village, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And being able to know that resources like that are out there, I think can be so life changing for a lot of people when they're having children after already having some.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap us up with the question that I seem to ask everybody, which is if you had one piece of advice and one product recommendation that you could give to a new parent, what would you suggest? What would you tell them?
From a perspective of a product for a child or for mom?
It can be either, whatever you feel like you benefited from the most, or if you can't come up with one, that's okay. You can come up with a couple.
Well, this might be a little bit for parents and for baby. We started using a weighted sleep sack from a company called Nested Bean. They're located in Massachusetts. And it's just a cute little sleep swaddle with a couple of like beans actually like sewed into the chest. And so it just gives baby that kind of feeling that they're being touched. It helped our daughter sleep much better, which was very welcomed for sure. And I don't know if this is like a product recommendation but I think for moms, especially the moms who have been through birth trauma, it is like seeking out support, whether it is from your family or from a medical professional.
Yeah.
Again, like we feel like we have to do it, and like we have to, like, we almost feel like we're weak if we need this additional support.
Right.
Or you feel a sense of guilt for feeling unhappy about your birth experience. People will say, well, at least you have a healthy baby.
Right.
But yes, and I also deserve to feel happy as well. Like I deserve to have my mental health and to work through this birth experience. And so yes. I think allowing yourself to seek out that support, whether it's in a holistic way and doing some meditation, or if it's with a psychologist, I think that like taking care of yourself, right, is taking care of baby.
100%. Oh my gosh, I could not agree more. And I feel like that's even perfect advice too. Like really taking care of yourself is the best thing that you can do for your child and your family as a whole. So I think that's so true. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. I know that this probably is, gotten easier to tell a story, but it's never going to be the easiest story to tell. But I think that,
right.
Coming on and being able to share is so huge, and I hope can help some people feel a bit more reassured and a bit less alone if they've gone through something similar. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.